Hello there. Welcome to the second episode of Eddie Explains. I am Eddie, and in this show what I try to do is I try and pick a specific political topic and go really in depth into it. This week what we're doing is we're doing 10 things you should know about Elizabeth Warren. And we're going to cover everything from her major policies, her background, how she became famous, as well as some of her issues such as Native Americans as well as race. Now, before we get into that, I just want to remind y'all, hey, I appreciate the support, so please subscribe, like, share, dislike my video, and also comment. Let me know what you think. And if you have any suggestions, let me know. I listen. I care. So let me know. So without further ado, let's get into Elizabeth Warren. The way we're going to do it is 10 things you should know about Elizabeth Warren, and let's start right now. Thing number 1, Elizabeth Warren used to be a Republican. It's okay, Liz. We all make mistakes. Elizabeth Warren has not been shy about bringing up the fact that she used to be a Republican. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because I believe it tells us a lot about her current political philosophy. See, she always considered herself a very pro-market, pro-business person, which she considered made a default Republican. She grew up in Oklahoma, 3 of her brothers served in the military, and she worked her way up. However, in 1978, a new bankruptcy law came out. Now, not a lot of people are talking about bankruptcy, and what was out there was a study by Purdue which pretty much said making it easier for people to file bankruptcy was a bad idea. However, Elizabeth Warren decided to investigate this question because what she figured out was that the study which was done by Purdue was actually financed by the credit card companies. And for her, that was a switching point. She realized something's not right here. Elizabeth Warren went into this study expecting to find that it was mainly deadbeats and lowlifes filing for bankruptcy. However, she realized that it was actually a cross-section of America, so the middle class, a lot of people in the middle class were actually filing for bankruptcy. And the reason why is that they were being deceived by credit card companies to take on higher interest rate loans. When she looked at Capitol Hill to see who was advocating for these people, in her words, she realized that Republicans typically were on the side of the credit card companies and the banks, and half the Democrats were also on the side of the credit card companies and the banks. But whenever someone was advocating for middle class families, for working class families being taken advantage of, it was typically a Democrat. And that's what solidified her switch. Pretty much, Elizabeth Warren became a Democrat because she realized credit card companies were using more deception than a horny teenage boy trying to convince you that a condom doesn't fit. If it fits on a banana, Johnny, it fits on you. Thing number 2, Elizabeth Warren is an expert on bankruptcy. Pretty much after saying to America, hey, America, a lot of people in the middle class are broke and it's not their fault. America pretty much was like, interesting, do tell me more. After publishing her book in 1989, As We Forgive Our Debtors, Elizabeth Warren really became a renowned expert when it came to bankruptcy. She started teaching at Harvard around 1992. She became a part of the National Bankruptcy Review Commission. She even started testifying to Congress about bankruptcy laws, in particular in 2005. Because around 2005, there were a bunch of interest groups which were trying to make sure that the bankruptcy laws were tightened, which pretty much means that banks wanted to be able to get their money easier from people who try to file for bankruptcy. Elizabeth Warren is very much against this law because she said it would affect mainly women who tend to be in these kinds of situations, and once again, it's punishing people for very unfortunate circumstances occurring. What's even more interesting about the 2005 law is that who was really championing it. And if you look at the hearings, the person who Elizabeth Warren was clashing against was none other than the senator from Delaware, Joe Biden. See, Joe Biden had an interest because a lot of banks and credit card companies are set in Delaware. So this law would have benefited them, and being a representative of Delaware, Joe was advocating on behalf of this new bankruptcy law. Elizabeth Warren was very much against this law, and she's written about it so many times about how she was frustrated at Joe Biden for supporting the banks. Now, I'm just going to make a quick prediction here. If you thought Kamala versus Biden was bad, wait till you see Warren versus Biden on September 13th. You heard it here first. Elizabeth Warren is going to bring up something about the bankruptcy law in 2005, and she's going to talk about credit card companies, and she's going to use that to attack Biden, and that's going to be one of her moments. Thing number 3, Republicans are scared of her and her ideas. So there's a couple of things I want to point out here. 1, at this point in her career in the early 2000s, Warren is still very much an academic who's just showing up in front of Congress to testify and talk about her ideas. However, in spite of the fact that she did fail to convince Congress not to pass the bankruptcy law in 2005, by 2008 she looked like a genius. See, Warren was very much anti-banks and credit card companies abusing the middle class and the working class people in America. Pretty much, she studied broke people. And you know what happened in 2008? A lot of people went broke. So Warren looked like a genius. Now, not only was she asked to help out with, give congressional oversight to how to give out the bailout package, the $700 billion bailout package that Congress passed, She was also asked by the Obama administration to help create something that would regulate Wall Street and make sure that this type of thing doesn't happen again. Intro, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now remember how I said banks and credit card companies act like horny teenage boys trying to convince you that a condom doesn't fit? Now imagine a horny teenage boy trying to say that while there's a sex ed teacher in the room. The sex ed teacher? Yeah, that's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is one of the most feared agencies on Wall Street. Now, the reason why I want to look into it and how it's designed is because Warren is also proposing creating a bunch of new agencies when she becomes president. And I think it's important to look at how she helped make this one because that might give us insight into what she's going to do if she becomes president. A couple of things Warren was very much afraid of when she made Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The first thing was that Republicans in Congress could just say, hey, in spite of the fact that you made this entire agency, we're just not going to fund it. So rather than making the agency rely on congressional funding, she made it rely on funding from the Federal Reserve. The second thing Warren did was she made sure that it wasn't a bipartisan commission leading the agency. Her reasoning in doing this was that for the agency to begin, it needs to set a standard. And if she makes a bipartisan commission, Republicans would most likely veto and stop the agency from being as aggressive as it can possibly be. A lot of people criticize this agency because this agency has been actually deemed in a lot of courts to say some of the people it goes after and the mandate goes after them unconstitutional. But also at the same time, it's managed to get billions of dollars back to consumers who are being exploited by credit card companies and banks. So Warren argues that the payoff is good and that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau should be going as hard as possible to try and get as much money as possible. And yes, sometimes they might lose, but it's better they take the chance anyway. However, Republicans got back at Warren one way. See, Republicans made it very clear to President Obama that they would make sure that Warren would not be able to lead this agency. So Obama had to actually pick someone else to lead the agency because Republicans made it very clear that they weren't going to let her lead the agency and that they would not stand with her nomination. Number 4, Elizabeth Warren is not a socialist. In her own words, she's a capitalist to the bone. Now, clearly she's not feeling the burn. And besides the fact that feel the burn sounds like a herpes metaphor, I can understand why Elizabeth Warren would not want to be associated directly with socialism. See, polls have showed that Americans say that they would rather elect an atheist or a Muslim over a socialist. So socialism in America, even in this modern day and age, is still kind of hard to elect people in spite of the fact that it is popular with the younger generation. However, Elizabeth Warren sees herself as more as a person who's trying to save capitalism rather than completely uproot capitalism. Now, there's two things which I think are really the crux of what Elizabeth Warren's vision for what capitalism and democracy should look like. There's the Accountable Capitalism Act. Now, what does the Accountable Capitalism Act do? One of the things it does is it makes sure that major corporations, that 40% of their boards are elected by their workers. Now in America, the way it typically works is that shareholders pretty much have control over the board and they pretty much decide who's on the board of directors. However, Warren is trying to give some of that power to workers. The question which most of y'all might have is, why is she doing this and will this actually work? See, Warren in her viewpoint sees capitalism in America as being too shareholder centric. And she's not necessarily wrong. Donald Trump is always talking about the stock market. And even though the stock market is a great indicator of the economy, it really doesn't affect most people as much as we think we do. See, 50% of Americans don't even own a share of stock, and 80% of the returns of the stock market grow just to like 10% of people in America. So the stock market is not really representative of the wealth of America. It's just a representative of the wealth of a very few small portion of America. Now, what we've noticed is that since the 1980s, under Reagan policies of deregulation and privatization of things, what's happened is that a lot of the profits tend to go to the CEOs and to the top executives, and workers really don't get a lot of the share of the profits. There's a lot of studies showing this. So what Warren believes would happen is if you actually allow workers to elect some of the board members, therefore that they have a control in how decisions are made by that company, it would make corporations more accountable, it would make corporations more likely to pay their workers, and it will bring about good results. Now, where have we seen this idea actually work? Well, we've actually seen it in operation in Germany. The idea is called co-determination. Now, a European think tank did a study on this because a bunch of different countries in Europe actually have co-determination in operation. And what they found is that in countries where co-determination was in existence, income inequality was lower, research and development was more intense, labor productivity was higher. However, GDP growth tended to be a little bit slower. So it's a question of what do you prefer? Do you prefer faster GDP growth, or do you prefer these other things such as income inequality, research and development, and better labor production? What the studies also found was that when that number reaches 50%, when workers can contribute and choose 50% of the board, what would happen is that a lot of these corporations would become less profit centric, and to the extent where it would actually hurt the corporation rather than benefit the corporation. So 50% is kind of like the magic number based off the research. Warren is trying to push for 40%, which is not 50% where things start to go bad, but is at the 40%. And I think she hopes that we can get all these other benefits, such as less income inequality, better research and development, and better labor productivity. In an effort to also save capitalism, Warren is also trying to get at the root of what's causing most of the problems within capitalism. And according to her, one of the major reasons we have a problem is lobbying. It's the fact that a lot of major corporations, what they would do is they'll get ex-politicians who have connections in Washington, D.C. to go and lobby on behalf of the agenda, and they can use as much money to the point where they have more representation than the average citizen of the United States. Now, how Warren intends to address this corruption is that she's going to put a lifetime ban on vice presidents, presidents, members of Congress, and federal judges from lobbying. So they won't be able to lobby after they've served in office. They also won't be able to own individual stocks in specific companies because if they do, Warren believes that this will influence their decision making. So she's going to say, hey, you can't own individual stocks in certain companies. Also, I believe for presidents and vice presidents, she will also want these individuals to put their assets in a blind trust once again for the same reason. And when it comes to bureaucrats who work for government agencies, she will put a certain amount of ban, not necessarily a lifetime ban, but in some cases less of a ban as compared to members of Congress, so that they too are not being used to influence politicians and Congress members to do things on behalf of certain companies once they're out of office. Now, do I think this is feasible? Personally, not likely. I don't think this is going to happen personally for the sole reason that a lot of these members of Congress do benefit from the way the system is set up. And that's part of the reason why they enter into politics, because they believe that once they get out of politics, they can make a lot of money lobbying and pushing these agendas for these other individuals. And that's not just Republicans, that's Democrats too. So that'll be a pretty hard sell. Also, Obama tried to limit lobbyists from being a part of his administration, and in spite of passing rules to limit them, he still ended up having 70 of them in his administration because, quite frankly, a lot of these lobbyists actually know what they're doing politically. They have the connections there, so it's so easy to put them in your administration. Thing number 5. What are Warren's other domestic policies? Well, since Warren's a bankruptcy expert, it's natural she's going to have some domestic policies that pertain to debt. One of the biggest kinds of debts in America is the $1.4 trillion owned by students. What Warren wants to deal with the student debt crisis is she's going to tax the 75,000 richest families in America, and with the revenue she gets from that money, she's going to pay $50,000 in debt for individuals who make less than $100,000 in income. Now, besides the fact that this is going to help and become a huge stimulus to the economy, it's going to allow young people to buy homes and invest at a young, earlier age, this program is also important because it cancels my debt. Yo, I was a walking lick, a walking subsidized loan lick to these colleges. So I am totally in support. I don't care who pushes this agenda. I am totally in support of student loans being canceled. And not just me. 64% of Americans actually support this idea when you take out Elizabeth Warren's name. So when you just tell them the idea and concept, they're very much in support of this idea. So this is a popular idea, and it would actually stimulate the economy. Now, there's a lot of criticisms of this idea. Some people think that this is unfair to those 75,000 richest families. Other people say that it's unfair to people who did not earn loans. Other people say it's unfair for a myriad of reasons, that they say it doesn't actually help the lowest income of individuals. But Warren is trying to make sure that she does. And another way she's going to combat that is by closing for-profit colleges and making sure that they don't get federal dollars, because they tend to take advantage of service members as well as low-income individuals and typically Black and brown individuals. So she wants to close for-profit schools. She also wants to give a lot of money to HBCUs so that they can educate and have more resources to educate people. Also, in addition to all these plans, she wants to make sure that college is tuition-free, or at least public colleges, both two-year colleges and four-year colleges. So community colleges and four universities, which are public, are tuition-free. In addition to education policy, Elizabeth Warren also has a very strong domestic climate change policy. So the policy is roughly about $3 trillion, and what she wants to do is she wants to make sure that we're investing in green manufacturing. She wants to make sure that we're ending coal electricity by 2030, and the way she's going to do this and pay for this is by reversing the Trump tax cuts. Other things she wants to also make sure to do is she wants to help coal miners transition from those coal plants being closed to other more sustainable technologies. She also wants to make sure that when we talk of federal public leasing, which is federal lands, that they are producing 10% of renewable electricity. Now, the reason why this is really important is because federal lands actually contribute about a quarter of emissions of greenhouse gases to the United States. And because they contribute a quarter of emissions, what Warren wants to do is when she first becomes president, she has promised that she will end the leasing out or the giving out of public land or federally owned land for the sake of drilling and oil consumption and oil extraction. However, in spite of the fact that her climate change plan is very robust and is considered one of the best climate change policies out there, there is still some criticism to the fact that she's not necessarily saying she's going to immediately ban the current oil production that is going on. Now, I know that there's a climate change hall of town going on today, so she might actually come out and rephrase that. But as of now, she really hasn't explicitly come out and said that she's going to ban all oil production as it currently is. Thing number 6. Elizabeth Warren technically doesn't have a healthcare plan. So whenever Elizabeth Warren is asked about healthcare, she typically says, I'm with Bernie on this. But she actually hasn't published her own plan, and it kind of makes sense why she hasn't done that. She does want to pull a Kamala Harris. And pretty much what Kamala Harris is, the moment you start publishing your ideas on healthcare, people are going to ask you some really important questions, such as, are you for abolishing private insurance? Are you against abolishing private insurance? And all these other things. Now, Elizabeth Warren, she has stated that she is comfortable with abolishing private insurance, and that's what Bernie's also in support of. She's in support of the idea of Medicare for all. Now, she does want to come up with a plan, I think partly because if she comes up with a plan and it's too conservative, people are going to say she's not progressive enough. If it comes up with a plan that is too far out there, people are going to call it socialist. And once again, we saw those poll numbers. People don't like voting for socialists, or at least American people don't like voting for socialists. So Elizabeth Warren is playing it very, very careful here. However, her past votes on healthcare show us what we can kind of expect. We know for a fact she's very much against the Hyde Amendment, which pretty much says that the federal government can withhold money from institutions that do abortions. We know that she's not in favor of insurance companies. She's trying to pass laws to pretty much limit their power. We know that for a fact. She's very comfortable with eliminating private insurance. Now, here's why it's really interesting and why these questions matter. See, when you ask people if they're for Medicare for all, 53% of America says yes, they're for it. When you ask whether they're for it, if it abolishes private insurance, that number goes down to 43%. So it's no longer the majority. When you say, well, are you still in support of Medicare for all if it raises taxes on the middle class? What ends up happening is 60% of Americans end up opposing Medicare for all. So Elizabeth Warren is playing it very safe. She has no reason to come up with a plan. Right now, she can kind of tic-tac off and kind of go off Bernie rather than come up with a plan and come up with details which would be looked at very scrupulously. So Elizabeth Warren is playing it safe, and understandably so. She doesn't want to come up with a robust healthcare plan where people look at it and analyze it too intensely and either call it not progressive enough or too progressive and socialist. So she's playing it very safe. Thing number 8, foreign policy. She's not a fan of China, first of all. She's not a fan of China. She hates the idea that China forces American companies to divulge their intellectual property to Chinese companies so that they can do business in China. So Elizabeth Warren is not a fan of that. She's also not a fan of the fact that China violates environmental standards and violates labor standards. So something Elizabeth Warren has been talking about doing is she wants to make sure that when treaties are negotiated, or whether they're bilateral or multilateral treaties or any kind of trade negotiation, that environmental standards and labor standards are being put in the forefront. See, she was very much against the Obama administration's Trans-Pacific Partnership because she believed that treaty gave too much power to corporations. What she wants to do is she wants to take that power from corporations and say, you know what? Labor groups should be a part of this. So labor should be able to give public comment on how treaties are set up and how trade deals are set up. She also believes that we should be forcing other countries who engage with us in trade deals to also adopt our environmental and labor standards. Not only is she going to try and get them to do that, but she's willing to give them what is called a Green Marshall Plan, where she wants to give them about $100 billion so that they can buy U.S. technology or U.S. green technology that doesn't pollute or cause as much emissions. Another part of Elizabeth Warren's foreign policy, which we also want to look at, is the U.S. military. So the U.S. military as an institution is the world's biggest polluter as an institution. If it was a country, it would be number 55 in the world. So what Elizabeth Warren is trying to make sure to do is to make sure that the U.S. military has zero emissions by the year 2030. So that's another thing she wants to do with the military, as well as the fact that she wants to pull the military out of a bunch of military conflicts that are happening across the world, specifically in places like Afghanistan. Thing number 9, Elizabeth Warren's criminal justice reform policies. When it comes to criminal justice reform, Elizabeth Warren does sound like a lot of other Democrats. I mean, they want to end things like cash bail, which unfairly affects low-income individuals who they might be accused of a small petty crime, but because they can't afford bail, they stay in jail for an extended period of time and they miss out on salary, they miss out on earnings, and they eventually start cutting plea deals just so they can get out of jail, all these other issues. So she wants to end systems like cash bail. She wants to end things such as capital punishment, so the death penalty. She's also very much against private prisons. She also wants to try and make sure that she pushes states to let go of more inmates and figure out ways to let go of inmates. She wants to decriminalize drugs. Also wants to repeal the Biden crime bill, so she wants to pretty much end mandatory minimums. All these different things, which, like I said, a lot of Democrats agree on. So I also think she might bring that up in the Democratic debate when she's right next to Biden and she can kind of challenge him on these issues. One thing which I did find interesting, a policy which I hadn't heard of really before, was focused deterrence. And the idea behind focused deterrence is rather than focusing on a lot of people, on a whole community when it comes to crime, especially violent crime, you should focus on very specific individuals who are likely to commit violent crime. See, what this whole idea is that it recognizes the idea that in America, a lot of the violent crime actually happens in very small, concentrated areas, in very small, concentrated neighborhoods. And a lot of the times, the police actually know who's committing the violent crime. So rather than trying to heavily police the entire community, why don't we approach these individuals who are committing the violent crime, partner up with community leaders such as churches, jobs, social workers, and say, hey, and as well as the police, and say, hey, we know that you're committing your potential to commit violent crime. We don't want you to commit violent crime. If you do go down this track, we will put you in jail, or we can help you with all these social services to make sure that you can find a way to earn a living and not have to stay on the streets or not have to use violent crime as a method of survival. Now, does this policy actually work? And yes, it actually does work when it's used in the way it's supposed to use. When you only have the police going to these individuals, it doesn't work as well. So you need to make sure that that social component as well as the police component is present. However, it was tried in Oakland, and what happened in Oakland is there was a 50% crime reduction between 2012, violent crime reduction between 2012 and 2017, and most people attribute it to these policies. It also caused a violent crime reduction in Boston in the 90s. Lastly, thing number 10, you knew it was coming, Warren and race. Now, Elizabeth Warren has had a fair share of problems with the race. Let's start, first of all, there's the whole issue of being Native American. And she said she was Native American, she did a DNA test, and it said that there might have been an ancestor a couple of generations ago. Trump started calling her Pocahontas. It was a huge problem, many people were insulted, and some people don't understand why many people were insulted. And here's the reason why. When it comes to Native Americanness, a lot of times there is a history of white people trying to use the status of Native American or the race or ethnicity of Native American as a way to get benefits, because there are benefits to being Native American within this country. And that's actually happened a lot of times. The LA Times actually reported that a lot of companies were naming themselves as Native Americans in spite of the fact that they don't have citizenship within the Native American tribes. See, being a Native American is not just something that you get from having blood. There's cultural, there's tribal rituals to getting that kind of citizenship. And when you ignore that, you disrespect that whole entire culture. So when Elizabeth Warren was saying all these things, a lot of people felt very offended by what she was saying, because it was saying that she is ignoring the fact that there are rituals and that there are customs to getting this kind of citizenship. And it's not just a matter of blood. Now, Elizabeth Warren has come out and she's apologized for this. She's been very frank. She's been saying she's wrong. She's been trying to deny it. Although some people think it's going to be a problem if she does end up winning the nomination, because Trump is definitely going to bring it up. But I'm sure she's going to think of a way around that, and she's going to think of some sort of argument. Also, in addition to that, she's come out with a very robust Native American plan, which seeks to make sure that it addresses crimes that happen on Native American lands. See, what she wants to do is she wants to give power to Native Americans to be able to judge and punish individuals who commit crimes on Native lands, which typically a lot of times they don't get to do. She also wants to solve issues of missing women, because there's a lot of missing women that do go missing in Native American tribes, so she wants to help solve that. And she also wants to introduce a lot of social services such as healthcare and public housing and all these other things on Native American tribes, so that she can address some of the social ills they do have in those communities. So she has a very robust Native American plan. Some people are for it, and some people say, look, She's supporting us. She's going to do all these amazing things. So let's forget what she did in the past. Some people have not gotten past that. And it's fair. It's up to you to decide whether you think that merits her not being the Democratic nominee, or whether you think that you can look past that apology and you can move on. You can say, hey, she has a plan for it and she's trying to address it and she's apologized. Let's move on. Let's do better and all these other things. So that's part of the issue with race. The other thing Elizabeth Warren has an issue with race is her polling numbers. See, a lot of times we look at who's going to vote for Elizabeth Warren, it's mainly white educated individuals. And we know that when it comes to Democrats, you need to win over the minority vote. You need to win over specifically black people. Black people are very important to the Democratic nomination process. However, a lot of black people currently right now are supporting Joe Biden. So Elizabeth Warren, not only does she have issues of race when it comes to the whole Native American issue, which she's trying to get over, she also has to figure out, how do I attract black voters as well as brown voters into my delegation and into my voting constituents. So she's trying to get that to happen, but right now she doesn't have it. She has a lot of white educated individuals, and the problem is with this is that a lot of these white educated individuals are also very race conscious. So if they see that you as a nominee can't pull the minority vote, can't pull the black and brown vote, they're going to gravitate towards other individuals. And also another problem with that is that you have Bernie Sanders, who does have similar policies to her. So because of that, some people feel very comfortable voting for Bernie rather than for Elizabeth. So Elizabeth Warren does have a lot of things to overcome. Specifically, I think her biggest challenge is going to be race. How is she going to be able to overcome the racial hurdle, as well as convince black and brown voters to be on her side? So you made it to the end. So thank you so much, y'all, for watching. I know this was a little bit long. I apologize for that. I really just wanted to go really in depth on Elizabeth Warren because y'all asked me to do that. But I promise in future I'll try to make sure that my videos are a lot shorter. However, with that, if you liked and enjoyed the video, please comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe. If you disliked the video, please comment, share, let me know why you disliked it, and most importantly, subscribe. But in all cases, subscribe. And yeah, thank you so much once again for watching this. Join me again next week for another episode of Eddie Explains. Peace.